Welcome to the Leaderonomics show, and today we have with us Marc Harty, CEO of MainTopic Media, an expert on social media and also on publicity and communication. Marc, welcome to the show.
Thank you, nice to be here.
Glad to have you here. Tell us a little bit about this whole, what you do and how you got to doing what you're doing.
Sure. I am a specialist in online publicity, and when you look at the marketing universe, it's very large. I mean, marketing has all sorts of different techniques and strategies, and my background is in copywriting. And when I looked at an opportunity, I didn't want to position myself as being an expert in everything. I wanted to get known and develop a reputation in one specific area. So if you imagine like the entire marketing universe, all sorts of advertising and direct marketing, and then publicity, and then I zeroed in on online publicity and learned and tested techniques that, and that's one of the advantages of online publicity, is that it works because you have metrics. You have things that you can track via websites.
Okay, but how did you get into that space? I mean, was it some passion, you had somehow?
It was really an opportunity. Now, as you know how fast things move on the internet.
That's right.
I had a marketing communications company, and we were doing what's called search marketing. Search marketing is obviously where your company or your name or the keywords that people use to find you on the search engines, when somebody does a search, they come up on the first page, and that's how websites generate traffic. And we were looking for ways that we can be more efficient and more economical, because a lot of times you may be familiar with what's called pay-per-click advertising. That's when you do a search and you see the ads down the right-hand side. Well, those can get very expensive. And a lot of times, lots of dollars, US dollars per click. So we were looking as how could we get on that first page and be more economical, more efficient for our clients. And then that's when we started doing press releases. The difference being, instead of doing press releases and targeting the media, we were targeting the ultimate prospect and consumer.
I see. And you've generated over 239 million in
US dollars.
In US dollars, right? For your clients. I mean, how do you do that, and what are some of the examples that you can share with us?
Sure. That's over the course of my career, and previously to owning my own company, I had high-level management positions with creative firms in the U.S. And some things that you may be familiar with here, because I think I ate at one in one of the malls, is I worked on the TGI Fridays account. And so I worked on that account for 4 years in terms of their marketing, doing television advertising, and a lot of in-store marketing.
Okay, okay. When you talk about this whole notion of PR and publicity and so on, is it still relevant for companies today? I mean, in light of the whole internet and everything else?
Well, and that's, in some cases, people have a misconception about PR, because one of the things that you asked me before how I chose to get into it. You know how fast things change on the internet, and things that worked even a year ago or 2 years ago aren't as effective today. And yet PR it's been around for 106 years. So that to me said, well, it's relevant to companies, but now we have PR, but we also have digital technology, we have online marketing. So it's kind of the best of both worlds, where you have something that is a proven communications vehicle that major companies use, and now small companies and even individuals and entrepreneurs use, with some of these new tools, like a lot of people don't know that you can actually create a press release that has a video. So for example, this interview, I could actually do a press release and embed our interview into the press release.
But how do you know it actually works PR?
And that's a good question. Before, in the old days, when you say you did a press release and you wanted to get some newspaper coverage, well, if nothing showed up in the newspaper, then you would judge that press release was a failure. Well, with online publicity, even if you don't get media coverage, so let's say you don't get any radio or television or newspapers or magazines, but you have an online presence, so you'll appear in the search engines, so for example Google, Yahoo, Bing, and your content will appear on other websites. So a lot of times when I send out an online press release, it'll appear on other media sites. So, for example, maybe it doesn't show up in the newspaper, but it shows up in the online version of the newspaper.
And so is this critical for all businesses, even small web businesses?
Well, I think it is in terms of it's the best vehicle that I've found to establish authority. You know, I spoke at an event over the weekend, and one of the things that I showed in terms of a demonstration was I'd sent out a press release on Saturday, and the event was on Sunday. And the very next day, and actually it was less than that, in a matter of a few hours, that press release was on the first page of Yahoo for some of the words that were important. It was a press release about health, about magnesium deficiency. And so that kind of instant visibility really helps companies, whether they're new or more established, because they can get their message out very quickly and very economically.
Okay. If I'm a young entrepreneur, I want to get into the space that you're in, what steps do I need to take? Or do I need to learn something?
Yeah, I mean, I think having some good writing skills helps, and then having some good instruction, because a lot of people think that when I talk about PR and publicity, they still have that old model in their mind that we're only targeting reporters and journalists. And so they really need to be more relevant and get up to today's current events.
Right, because today's reporters and journalists are bloggers, right?
Exactly, exactly. And a lot of times there are blogs and authority sites that have more clout and more presence in the market than even the more traditional media sites.
So even traditional PR firms haven't really played in the whole online social media space, right?
They're trying to, and some are more advanced than others. I've actually trained PR firms to get them more online media savvy, because their model is more, we're building relationships with reporters, and that's how we get publicity for our clients. But now we have a technology side, which is the search marketing side, and that's where they're weak.
And how, I mean, has really social media really impacted the whole PR community?
It has, and actually if you look at companies, a lot of times the social media area of responsibility falls under PR as opposed to marketing. It varies from company to company, but it's an interesting evolution, and I think there's a lot of opportunity. And you know, we were just talking about the event yesterday. All the jobs that you see for social media manager, you know, these are new positions that are being created by companies that see the opportunity for an online social media presence in terms of getting their message out to their customers and their constituencies.
Is there, I mean, you mentioned about the video, is there other differences between a social media press release and a typical press release?
That's an excellent question, and it's a different philosophy in terms of distribution. When you there's an expression which you may be familiar with, I'm going to put a press release on the wire. And there's a news wire, and they broadcast that message out. They have different distribution channels, and so that's kind of like one model. With a social media release, you're really uploading your content to a social media platform, like a portal, and then they're using their techniques to get that message out and attract people in. So one is more of an attraction model, one is more of a push marketing or distribution model.
You know, I get a lot of questions from boards, especially boards that want to learn about, you know, how they can play a role in terms of helping their organizations drive social media, get into that space, leverage it, and basically publicize their organizations through social media. What, you know, if a board member comes to you and say, hey, help me, you know, what advice would you give them?
Well, the first thing that I would do is the mistake that people make is they get caught up in the tactics. And you know, somebody will say, I've got to be on Facebook, or I've got to be on YouTube, or I've got to be on Twitter. And I say, you know, take a breath, step back, and what's your strategy? And so, you know, if you have a strategy, a marketing strategy, what is your main message? Because each of those channels work a little bit differently, have a little bit of a different kind of audience makeup. And I think a lot of times people rush to the tactic, where if they spend a little bit of time refining their message, they'd be much more successful.
Okay, so it's about refining the message. But strategically, is there other things that one needs to be aware of in terms of the whole strategy into social media?
Yeah, I spoke at this event yesterday. One of the pieces of advice that I gave is don't try to do everything at once, because there's this, you know, I've seen it on people's faces, their anxiety, like, well, I should be doing more on Facebook, or I should be doing more, and so there's this rush of feeling like I have to catch up because I'm behind what my colleagues are doing or what my competition is doing. And my advice is specialize or focus on one first. So if you feel Facebook is the place to be, then really understand that vehicle first, and then add some of these other components. Then you can add things like LinkedIn or YouTube, but focus on one first and really get to know that and have some experience and results, and then expand to some of these other channels.
Okay, so you think things like Facebook and all are not just fads?
That exact question came up in our event yesterday, and the interesting thing is, we were talking, nobody remembers MySpace. MySpace came out a few years earlier, and at the time, everybody was talking about it. Now nobody talks about it.
Friendster
and Friendster, exactly. So, and even Twitter. Twitter came out, and at one point was more popular than Facebook. Now Facebook is like the 800-pound gorilla, and there may be another website that takes its place over the coming years. So it's important not to get caught up on the sites, but the idea of social media. Social media is about conversations, communities, and people coming together around a specific topic. That's not going to change. In fact, that's only going to accelerate. So, I mean, for things like mobile marketing, that's going to make it even easier for people to connect and congregate. I mean, we're doing this interview in Malaysia. I'm based in the U.S., and yet all these kind of geographical barriers are dissolving because of social media.
Right, right. So you do. I mean, where do you see PR and this whole publicity, game going in the next 50 years or so as the world continues to change? I mean, if you put your visionary cap on.
Well, and that's a question, because that's a great question, because I've seen articles, is PR dead? And my answer is there's some parts of PR that deserve to die because they're not targeted. A lot of times PR would be kind of one size fits all, and we're just going to push this message out. A lot of times the mistake people make with PR is they find an authority site, say a technology site. There's a site you may be familiar with called TechCrunch. It was actually recently purchased from AOL. A mistake a PR firm would make is we're just going to send a press release to TechCrunch. Well, TechCrunch is going to say, you don't understand our website, you don't understand our model. There needs to be a more customized and more personal approach. Get to learn our website. So one of the things that PR is changing is you can't just blast something out. You can, but it's not as effective as it used to be. So there's more customization, and then there's more integration in terms of social media and some of these other marketing disciplines.
Okay. Then let's talk a little bit about leaders. I mean, many leaders around the world try to use social media and try to use publicity to enhance themselves. Does that work? I mean, we see the issue now in the US with a president who's won through the usage of social media,
yes,
and now struggling. So does that work? And in the long term, is that a valid tactic for leaders to take?
It was interesting. I was talking to one of the other speakers at this event yesterday. We were talking because one of his clients is the Malaysian government, and they have some of the government officials on social media, and the thing is that there's one challenge to be on it. The next challenge is, what are you saying when you're on it? Because a lot of times people make blunders, they make mistakes, and then it comes back, and then they have to deal with negative publicity or negative perception. So my feeling is they should be on there, but they should have a very clear understanding on specifically what topics to talk about. Because a lot of times it's all about, oh, I'm going into a meeting or I'm talking about this, and they could be much more strategic in terms of the topics when they talk about whether it's Twitter or Facebook.
So your take is be on, but be careful.
Yes, be on there, and it's much easier to relate to an individual than it is a company. I mean, in the States, you see, visionary leaders, and even in global companies. Richard Branson is on and is very visible on Twitter, yes, and on Facebook, yes, and some CEOs are very visible. And Guy Kawasaki, very well-known author and one of the early developers or evangelists for Apple Computer, he's on and very visible. But they have a very defined presence, and people have expectations on what they can expect when they see a tweet from those individuals. So yeah, having that strategy in place makes a world of difference.
Okay. You know, there are a lot of people that come out there and talk about social media and, you know, gurus and so on and so forth. You know, what, you know, and you've been relatively successful. And what differentiates you and what makes you, you know, have, you know, that substance?
And that's a great question, because I think a lot of times people with social media, you know, I mentioned that anxiety earlier, they're in a rush to just get it done and get it out there. And there's some things where production over perfection is helpful, but in this case, because it's so visible and people, particularly with public figures, or even, I mean, I consider myself a public figure. I do a lot of speaking. I, you know, appear on interviews and programs such as this. So a lot of times people, you know, maybe they're envious and they want to see you screw up so they can, like, you know, say something negative about you. So I think just being smart, and if controversy comes up, don't duck it. You know, I've had challenges. I had somebody in the event yesterday question some of the tactics that I was talking about, and I explained to him, well, here's our methodology and here's why I'm saying this. And then he was like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. So it's really about just, if you run into some negative publicity, having a blueprint or a battle plan and how you can counteract it. The worst I've seen is when people kind of retreat. If there's negative, something negative about them, they don't say anything, and you can get out there, not in terms of being in a defensive posture, but being out there and you know, talking about what makes your company and your values successful.
Yeah, well, fantastic. You know, if just a quick question, if I were a young kid, just graduated from college, I want to be like you. I want to be successful, I want to get into the PR and the publicity business. What must I do? Or what should I do? What advice would you give me?
Well, there are a couple things. I mean, you may have gone to school and got some elemental training in terms of PR or marketing, but there's so many things that you can find out online about online marketing, and it changes so quickly. I mean, you could actually go to a university and go through some kind of curriculum, and by the time you get out of school, a lot of the things have already changed. So what I would suggest is visit a lot of the blogs. There's a lot of great free content where you can learn about certain techniques. You know, just do a search, whatever your topic is. If you're interested in publicity in Asia, or, you know, just do it and see what websites come up. There's a wealth of information available.
Yeah, so Google it. Huh?
Yes.
And my final question, any nuggets of wisdom that you'd like to share with our viewers, you know, in terms of advice, or, you know, your final take?
Sure. My advice is, don't get anxious about all these, you know, it's kind of like the bright shiny object syndrome. Is you get your attention span today is so short, you go over here and do one thing, you go over here and one thing. Just take a deep breath, slow down, find something that you're passionate about and pursue that. And like I said, one social media tactic, get to know that really well. I mean, I have some colleagues, and they started from nothing, and they only focused on YouTube. And right now they have, I want to say, they're in the dating romance niche. They have combined viewings of their YouTube videos of over 60 million views. And nobody knew them, but they focused on one thing. They didn't try to do everything.
Yep. Well, Marc, thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time here. Marc Harty, CEO of MainTopic Media, here on the Leaderonomics Show.